Hello everyone. Welcome to the November edition of CXO Talks. With me, we have Jed, who is the CEO of Auxilius Pharma, and Uwe, who is basically the CMO of Auxilius Pharma. So today they have taken out time to talk to us, talk about the company, about its molecules, and what they are doing. So welcome, Jed and Uwe, and thank you so much for taking out time to talk to us. And yeah, so before we start and start talking about the company and the molecules, can we start a little bit about the history of the company, how it started, when it started, how you and Uwe met, and a little bit of a story about the company. That would be a great if you can talk about that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Himanshu. It's great being here. Thank you for having us. So, in terms of history, both Uwe and I joined Columbia University Public Health Program, was roughly 7 years ago, to explore ways to address unmet medical needs. And with my career experience primarily in the European Union, I was particularly interested in understanding the US market. At this time, I still lived in Poland, and for 2 years, I would fly every month to New York for classes, which shows you the level of commitment I had. And it didn't take us long to realize that we both shared a vision of funding a company, which led to the birth of Auxilius Pharma. And while developing new molecules has pretty low odds of success, we were both drawn to the concept of value-added medication. That means optimizing existing drugs to deliver clinical value to patients while keeping risks and the development time more acceptable. And this is what we do.
Thank you. So thank you for that quick introduction. You want to add something to what Jed said?
It was a really fortuitous incident in the master's program at Columbia that we ran into each other, and it wasn't that hard to find each other. We're both originally from Europe. My background is in medicine. I'm a internist by training. I did part of my medical training here in the US during medical school. I came here as an exchange student. I did my last 2 years of medical school at various different medical schools. But ahead of that, I did a research fellowship in cardiovascular disease at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York that focuses on the diagnostic workup of patients with chronic cardiovascular disease and heart failure and coronary disease. So you can tell, the clinical area that we started our first developments in is a little bit reflective of the background. I did most of my work in patients with coronary disease or heart failure, my research in valvular heart disease in patients that have developed symptoms of heart failure. And and Jet also has a little bit of a family history of having been born here in the US, growing up in Europe, going back and forth. We're both standing with one foot in Europe and with the other foot here on the other side of the Atlantic in the US. And we did use the program at Columbia a little bit to explore the options of what we wanted to do with our business idea. And it's rarely ever the case that you meet somebody who shares the same vision and brings a completely complementary set of skills to the table. I had been thinking about doing something like starting a company for quite some time, and I had a number of different ideas. I really didn't have the skill set, though, to actually run, administer, and coordinate the work that a CEO does on a daily basis. I'm much more immersed in the clinical and research operations of the company. And it was fortuitous to like run into somebody like Jet who brought all of that to the table, something I had been looking for a long time. So it was really wonderful. And you find stories like that at the beginning of many companies. It didn't take us long to figure out that we wanted to do what we're now doing. It took us a while to set it up, but I think that the last 5 years that we've been working together really show that when you bring really good expertise and experience in the area to the table, you can actually much faster navigate the otherwise really difficult process of clinical development of new medications. We also very quickly agreed on the fact that there are a number of what I would want to call diamonds in the rough in pharmacological treatment of cardiovascular disease, and our lead asset is a good example for that. It's a drug that has really a number of enormous benefits to patients, especially in the US where the product is not available, that come out of my joint clinical training, both in Europe and here, where the risk of drug development is much, much, much lower, but where the benefits are just as compelling as a brand new drug, since AUX001 will be a new molecular entity, brand new innovative medication for the treatment of chronic angina in the US. We'll go through a little bit of the chronic angina that is in your second question in just a moment, just to highlight how little has been happening in that area in terms of drug development and why that is. But it was Columbia and especially these executive programs that we were in, a wonderful platform to kind of pressure test where you are with your career, what you want to really do, and hopefully finding somebody else to shake hands with and start over. So that's kind of like at the beginning of our development.
So to sum up, one can say this is a partnership made in heaven. So you complement each other. So you complement each other in terms of you have the medical expertise, he has the operational expertise. Both are passionate about public health. Both have met and realized that goals are same. So I guess this is a pretty lock and key kind of a thing, basically fitting together, basically. If I'm not wrong.
I think that's a very nice way of putting it. We'll hope that our partnership will pay dividends here on Earth as well. But other than that, it was a match made in heaven. Yes.
Amazing, amazing. So, I don't know if you remember that we already had one interview previously as well, sometime back. I think in 2023, we had a small conversation. Obviously, I was not there. It was a conversation with one of my colleagues. So,
we remember it well. It was, particularly interesting because you guys were so well prepared to take a very close look at what we're doing, and you knew our history a little bit and the area that we're operating in. No, I remember the last interview well. It was great.
Awesome. So I think let's take it from that interview. And there is angina, and then there is chronic angina, CSAP, basically, which is basically a rare disease. Chronic stable angina pectoris, if I'm spelling it correctly. So what's the difference between both of them?
Yeah, let me run you through a couple of slides that will nicely illuminate what it is. It's
that
also
would be amazing.
Some of the slides that we used at our recent presentation at the world's largest cardiovascular meeting, which is the European Society of Cardiology, that was held in London. So let me put that up on the screen, and sure. I'll run you really quickly through that. Can you see the slides?
Yeah, the screen is here. Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. So, chronic stable angina is a very, very common problem, but it's not really a disease. Chronic stable angina is the symptomatic expression of the most common cardiovascular disease that we have, which is chronic coronary artery disease. And most, but certainly not all of the patients have a classic history of macrovascular coronary disease. They have plaques that develop over time and lead to basically compromising blood flow in the coronary artery circuit, and patients develop these very typical symptoms of chronic chest pain. There can be also a number of other symptoms, but the most common form is chronic chest pain. You see that here very nicely in the example of two patients. There are other forms of angina, as you mentioned, that are much rarer, but that also play a role, because nobody ever really has just one problem all along. But we'll get to that in just a second. Chronic stable angina is very common in both the US as well as in the European market. We're developing our lead asset for both areas. In the US, it's almost 12 million people, and it keeps getting more because we're getting very good in preventing people from dying of the consequences of coronary disease. Patients survive their first or second heart attack and live much longer with coronary disease, which means they live much longer with the problems that chronic coronary disease is causing. One of them, and the most common symptomatic issue, being chronic stable angina, which has a really significant impact on how much people can ambulate, whether they can hold down a job, and so on. And the second problem with chronic stable angina is that it's still not very well controlled. The treatment of chronic angina has recently seen a really dramatic change, and that explains a little bit of what we're doing and where we are. Treating patients with chronic stable angina, and stable really means that the relationship between the level of physical exercise and the onset of symptoms is in a stable relationship. So, for example, patients walk 5 city blocks in New York City and they're fine. They walk the 6th city block and they become symptomatic and get their chest pain. Then they have to take a vasodilator medication. And it's very much similar to what you see with patients that have asthma. And with the effect of the vasodilator, the symptoms disappear and they can continue to ambulate. Now, the biggest problem with angina is that you never really know, is it the chronic stable angina or is it a unstable angina attack? Very often patients are not that familiar with it. They're not well compliant with medications, which is another problem that we're hoping to address with our new medication, and whether they're having symptoms because they forgot to take their medications, or is this a sign that the stable angina is becoming unstable? So patients very frequently end up in the hospital, emergency rooms, or get hospitalized, very often seeing invasive procedures. And the cost for chronic stable angina treatment is very much driven by this dynamic of really expensive diagnostics and interventional cardiovascular procedures. Chronic stable angina, develops when patients with coronary disease reach a certain level of occlusion of their vessels, especially if they're macrovascular disease types, and along the trajectory of developing chronic coronary disease, angina pops up. The problem with angina treatment is that in order to address the underlying disorder, which is coronary disease in most patients, you have to take a set of medications. You can see here 3 of them that are the most commonly used ones. And to treat the symptoms, the chest pain of angina, you have to take a different set of medications, and neither one set of medications does the job of the other, and vice versa. So you end up, as you can see here, with sometimes 5 to 6 medications to address the risk of the disease developing further and becoming worse, and to treat the symptoms. If you think of angina, it's really along the trajectory of typical cardiovascular disease development, which starts with risk factors, goes through atherosclerotic plaque in your coronary disease, heart attacks, left ventricular remodeling, congestive heart failure, all the way to end-stage disease and death. And our medication addresses a whole set of problems along that trajectory, not only the symptoms of angina, but also the underlying disorder. So if we go back to the previous slide, our drug, if we get lucky and do our work well and the FDA will approve us, will be the first drug that addresses both the underlying disorder and has a positive impact on the prognosis of the disease, but also treats the symptoms of angina, which will make it much easier for patients to manage their disease and while taking lesser medications than they currently do. Because as you can see on this graph here, most US and also European patients take 2, 3, sometimes 4 medications just to treat the symptoms of angina. And in the relatively limited amount of drugs that are available for angina, there's a lot of switching, dose adjusting, and other things going on in order to optimize therapy. One of the problems along that trajectory is, of course, the problem that drug development in chronic angina almost stopped in 2006, 2007, with the last medication being approved in the US in 2006, which was a drug called ranolazine, and no new drug development having led to any additional approval for angina symptomatic treatment. And that had a lot to do with what I'm going to show you here, with the development of stents. We thought that stents, which is a form of introducing a little metal mesh, or now with different materials into a compromised narrowing of a coronary artery and keeping it wider open and thereby increasing blood flow, that would address the problem not only of coronary disease, but also of the symptoms of coronary disease, which is what angina is. We're now in, as you can see, in the 5th and 6th generation of stent development. And we thought that stenting was going to fix the problem of angina right along with the prognosis improvement in coronary disease. But that didn't work out. In fact, 2 large outcomes trials and a lot of smaller trials along the way have, since 2007 up to 2020, and now in multiple years of follow-up, shown that patients that are at the stage that they have chronic stable angina do not benefit from stents at all. Neither their prognosis is getting better, nor do their symptoms disappear. So, in 2024, we're back to treating angina with optimized medical therapy. The European Society of Cardiology just revised their guidelines. The American College of Cardiology will do it soon as well. And the drugs that we have in the US are very limited and pretty old, as you can tell here. So our medication, if it gets approved, will be the very first new drug to treat the symptoms of angina. And it will be the very first drug in the US that does both treatment of the symptoms of angina, but also of the underlying disorder. I'm going to stop here just to talk about angina, and we'll just give you a little flavor of what our drug actually is and why we developed it. Here's a little screenshot from our presentation at the European Society of Cardiology just a couple of weeks ago, where we basically addressed why we're developing the disease, the medication, and what is the problem with the currently, at least in Europe, available form of its forerunner. And what you can see here very nicely is that nicorandil, which is available in Europe and in many other countries in the world as a immediate release medication, is not only that it's in multiple doses a day, in most countries 3 times a day, in Europe mostly used twice a day, and that is its old pharmacokinetics. The drug releases the dose of nicorandil, as you can see there on the left, within an hour, with almost 85% of the dose applied. Unfortunately, the effect of the drug is not long enough that at 12 hours you still see the desired effect, which you can see there with the little arrow. At 12 hours, nicorandil almost does no work. And that is right in the middle of the day when patients with angina need the protection of the drug the most. The other problem with nicorandil is that it has a couple of other problems because the dose comes out so quick and so overwhelmingly fast. And nicorandil being a drug that's mainly a vasodilator, but also has a second mechanism of action that is mainly thought to be responsible for its outcomes benefits. It does kind of destabilize early on the hemodynamics a little bit of patients that are on it. Vasodilators, as you know, lead to blood pressure drops because they are dilating the vessels. And in response, the heart tends to then increase a little bit the heart rate. And it was our theory at the beginning of the development of AUX001 that if we fix the pharmacokinetic problem and make this a much more stable extended release medication, that the hemodynamic problems that you see with immediate release, and you can see here for different doses just how much the heart rate can go up here, up to 20 beats per minute. That's a problem for patients with coronary disease, especially when they also have congestive heart failure, because that heart cannot compensate for rapidly increasing heart rates and working a little harder because it's a failing heart. So what we found is that when you put this drug into an extended release and make it much more smooth in its release, that the effect on the heart rate is negligible. You can see here the heart rates of the patients that we had in our clinical trial, healthy volunteers, and you see that the heart rate barely changes at all. And if it changes, it doesn't get faster. It gets actually a little slower. And that, of course, has to do with the fact that the blood pressure of our patients stayed completely within the normal limits, and the heart did not feel like it needed to compensate for anything at all. That is the main clinical part of what we presented at the meeting in the European Society of Cardiovascular Disease. And it was taken with a lot of interest because people like this drug in the countries that it's approved in Europe, but they also see some of the issues with it. The other thing that was very important for us was also to look at another problem that immediate release nicorandil has, and that is headaches. Every vasodilator causes them, and can they be easily and effectively addressed? And again, we were able to show that despite the fact that patients do suffer from vasodilator-related headaches, which is very simple as a result of vasodilation in the brain vessels, that with our version of nicorandil, the severity was mostly mild and moderate, and simply giving patients paracetamol, or what we in the US call acetaminophen, completely cure some of their headaches in a relatively short amount of time. We did this as a proactive treatment in our clinical trial. We will probably switch to a prevention modus in the next version of our clinical efforts and give patients the medication ahead of time, so that they don't suffer from headaches at all and don't have to signal, I need medication help right now. That leads basically, and this is my last slide here, to AUX001 coming, if we get approved, to the US in a competitive profile that is more attractive and might also be a really, really interesting opportunity for not only for clinicians, but also for the health insurance industry in the US, that it would be interested in covering a medication that not only treats symptoms, but also the underlying disorder and keeps patients basically out of the hospital and therefore out of reach of unnecessary expensive medical diagnostic and interventional procedures. So we're pretty hopeful here, and what our research in the clinical trial has shown, not only does the drug seem to be very safe and very tolerable, but it seems to have a little bit of a leg up on the medication that it was originated from, which is the immediate release version of Necorandil, in that it seems to be a bit more safe and certainly much more tolerable. We only have to show that the drug is equivalent to its forerunner under 505(b)(2), which is the regulatory pathway under which we're going to apply for approval in the US, and that the FDA has already confirmed. But it's, of course, certainly nice as on the safety and tolerability profile. Our drug has a little bit of a leg up. This is early data, and it's data in healthy volunteers. We very much hope that this will hold up.
Great. Thank you so much for giving out this all information. Okay, so you have actually answered a couple of my questions, which I was about to ask you. So thank you for that. So we have seen ESC results. I see that you are planning to present results at AHA as well, upcoming AHA as well. So are the results going to be slightly different? There's going to be additional information which is going to be presented, or it's going to be the same?
No, that's a very good question, and thank you for the question. We like every company, we're always running up against deadlines. At the time that we submitted on our abstract to the European Society of Cardiology in March of this year, we had a full adjudication of our safety profile with a couple of things still in the works. What we're going to show at the American Heart Association is the electrophysiological safety profile of our prototype, meaning how does the EKG look like? And in our review division at the Food and Drug Administration is the division of cardiology and nephrology. EKG data showing that the drug does not interfere with the normal dispersion of electrical activity in the heart, and therefore doesn't have any effect on the heart rhythm, is another thing. I mean, our heart rate data already shows part of that story, but we submitted the findings from the EKG monitoring results at the AHA. And you know how it is, you submit your abstract and you're hoping, oh my God, let them please take our abstract and let us be in the abstract book. We were very surprised by the positive results of the response we got from the ESC, because in Europe, the originator drug is available, and our clinical results showed that there is some improvement to be expected with our medication compared to the older multiple times a day medication that we started with. But we weren't really prepared that they would say, oh, come on and give us a oral presentation. We had the same response from the American Heart Association, so we are looking forward to giving a little talk on the electrophysiological safety profile of AUX001 in Chicago in a couple of weeks in November.
Awesome. So firstly, all the best for that. I'm pretty sure that the results are going to astonish a lot of people, and so how soon can we expect this drug AUX001 to be filed with FDA and EMA, and maybe be available in the market? Is there any timeline in mind?
Yes, Himanshu, we think that we will be able to file an NDA in 2027 here in the US.
Okay. And maybe followed by an EMA MA, basically, if I'm not wrong.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. We are in a dialogue with the European Medical Agency to establish the details of the development program for the European Union, because it is different than here in the US. And the reason is that, well, in Europe there is nicorandil, whereas here in the US it has never been approved, which makes the a pretty significant difference. But yes, you are right. Obviously, Europe is such a large market. Well, I mean, there is more patients with angina there than here in the US, that obviously we will seek to get the product approved also in Europe, but also in some Asian countries, notably China.
Nice.
Yeah, in Europe,
So,
it's a little interesting. The product, nicorandil was approved in Europe in a selection of countries that doesn't include some of the biggest markets in Europe. It doesn't include Germany, which does not have the medication available. It doesn't include Italy and Spain. So there's a significant commercial opportunity in the European market, just as much as here in the US. But here in the US, the molecule is not even available in its immediate release form. So we chose to address the highest unmet need geography first, which is the US market. But as Jed said, there's certainly other plans that we have for rolling it out in markets in Europe and in other parts of the world as well.
no, definitely, this sounds like a great catch for both the regulatory. I'm not a regulatory expert, but this product sounds like a great catch. And the reason, one, because you mentioned that at different stages of angina, there are multiple drugs involved, and nicorandil basically, or AUX1, is trying to solve becomes one product which can be used for multiple symptoms and within the angina space. So rather than taking 6 medicines or 7 medicines, you're taking 2 or 3 medicines, which includes AUX001, if I'm not wrong. So and plus, obviously, after 2007 there is no drug approved, so that also makes it a kind of a unmet need in the market, basically, for a new innovative drug. Am I right?
Yeah, I don't know if we can shrink the drug load by that much, but there's certainly going to be benefits when it comes to the control of angina symptoms. That might mean that patients might get away with just 2 instead of 2 or 3 or 4 anti-anginals. When it comes to the control of the underlying disorder, nicorandil is the only anti-anginal, meaning a drug that treats the symptoms of angina, that has a large outcomes trial. It was studied in Europe, especially in the UK and in Ireland, in over 5,000 patients, and showed a significant reduction in coronary events, as well as in angina related hospitalizations, which is certainly something that the payer audience, health insurance companies in particular, will be very happy. We did some early market research with payers, and they were very excited about that aspect of nicorandil's potential.
No, definitely. I was actually about to, ask you that whether you have spoken to any payers, which you have obviously answered to me that yes. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that payers would love this product once it gets in market, and gets its approval and everything. So I think we have spoken at a great length about AUX001. There are 2 more molecules which are visible on your pipeline on your website, basically. So I would like you to shed some light on those 2 molecules as well, AUX002 and 003. So are they both again into cardiovascular domain, or they are beyond that? Can you speak a little bit about both of them?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a little bit of an intro on that, and then Jet is going to walk you through the particulars of the molecules. So I mentioned earlier that angina is an enormous and growing market. It's the ugly side effect of being so successful with treating a coronary disease so effectively is patients live longer, and that means they live longer with the consequences of the disease, including chronic stable angina or chronic chest pain. AUX001 is not going to fix everything and every problem, and we have not only that asset, but also 2 additional assets that we're currently exploring for their opportunity in this particular area. So both of them are also anti-anginals, for the and one of them in particular is a fixed dose combination. I told you earlier that patients both in Europe and in the US are on 2.5 anti-anginals on average, with some patients being on 3 or more. And that's certainly partially a reason, a function of the fact that a lot of these drugs are a little older. There's probably also compliance problems here. But how about putting 2 effective anti-anginals in a fixed dose combination? That is the idea of one of them, one of our development projects. And with fixed dose combinations, you have to be very careful. Physicians do like to titrate medications to a degree, and fixed dose combinations sometimes can run up against challenges, especially when they're not in the same clinical indication area. But when we look in the past, especially in cardiovascular disease, if you stay within the same indication, meaning blood pressure, and you put 2 effective blood pressure medications into one fixed dose combinations, there've been resounding successes in fixed dose combination approaches to a number of cardiovascular disease. And Yenjay will give you a couple of those more recent ones that show that especially with an impact on making the treatment for the patient so much more simple. And the chronic angina patient is a classic polypharmacy patients. They're not just having angina and coronary disease. A lot of these patients are also getting treated for cardiovascular risk factors like diabetes, hypertension. So we're talking about 7, 8, 9 different medications, depending on if they also have aspects of congestive heart failure. So we're trying to put a real noticeable dimple into that pretty daunting challenge to the patients.
Well, so Himanshu, to build on what Uwe has already mentioned, we do not disclose the names of the molecules at this stage. I expect that we'll be able to do so next year. What I can tell you is that AUX002 stays within the area of coronary artery disease, and it's another existing multiple times a day agent which is pretty popular, pretty potent, but poorly formulated, and we have a very promising synergistic idea how to improve it, to simplify it into a once daily dosing and to make the dosing more convenient for patients, particularly for the elderly patients who oftentimes have difficulties swallowing. And then there is AUX003, which is a fixed dose combination built upon the innovation we are developing in our second project, AUX002. So we will be combining this agent with another one used for the treatment of angina, and as Uwe has mentioned, it can reduce the pill burden from 4 pills a day to 1. So that is a pretty significant improvement. And also there is a very promising synergistic mechanism. And to take a more big picture here, in the previous years, we have seen some really interesting fixed dose combinations brought to the market in cardiovascular space by the largest players, by big pharma players. And just to mention a few examples, we got Opsynvi by J&J for pulmonary artery hypertension, or Entresto by Novartis, which is another fixed dose. So, oftentimes, people tend to say or think that, well, big pharma is not interested in optimizing or reviving existing medications, where these examples go to show that it is not the case.
I completely agree with you. And just to tell you, I was part of Novartis and specifically Entresto team. I have worked with the team when I was with Novartis, so I know the
Oh,
success story. So I completely know, and I can relate to what you are saying. So yeah, and then
Yeah,
we'll be
and Chesto is a good example, right? This combination of valsartan and
definitely.
citralopram,
It's a fantastic
it's like,
example.
yeah,
It's a fantastic example. It is a blockbuster drug. We were just doing some analysis in Pharma Shots, and we realized that this year, I think last year, it became $1 billion product actually. Interesting. So definitely yes. So I want to circle back again on AUX 001 because all the three drugs, 002 and 003, all three are in cardiovascular. So I just want to circle back on the lead molecule and ask you that are you thinking of any other indications beyond CSAP, as a life cycle management or something like that? Maybe I know you might not want to reveal that information to everyone at the moment. I just a yes or no would also be suffice.
well, short answer is no. We don't want to go beyond cardiovascular space in a short time. Longer answer is yes. We are considering it in a long term. Now, Himanshu, to be a little bit more specific, cardiovascular therapeutic area is a pretty large area. In fact, it's still the number one killer in the US. So, we think there is sufficient space for us, and we see, synergies and benefits of having a laser focus on this area. I mean, well, cardiovascular is a pretty broad area. We are focusing on just a part of it, which is the coronary artery disease. And I can assure you there is really a lot of knowledge to be digested and collected here. Over the years, we've been pretty successful thanks to Uwe's effort in assembling a truly impressive team of clinical advisors, leading key opinion leaders in this space, and we are really benefiting from their support in what we are doing. So we want to stay within this space. We feel that applying our strategy, optimizing the release profile and therefore the PK, can really go a long way and can result in drugs being approved in a much shorter time. Having said that, with what we've learned and the technologies we have at our disposal, in the long term, we do not rule out franchising out of the cardiovascular space. But for now, we can see plenty of opportunities with our assets and with their life cycle management within cardiovascular space.
well, to the other side of your question, Himanshu, AUX001, where the lead indication for the 505(b)(2) application with the FDA is chronic stable angina. The molecule and our plans have multiple legs to stand on. The originating generic in AUX001, Nicorandil, has, when it comes to life cycle management, and I think that was part of your question, a number of additional indications that we are very seriously looking at. Most of them, as Jed said, are in cardiovascular disease, but they cross over the boundary of just coronary disease. So, for instance, Nicorandil has shown significant benefits in the improvement of left ventricular pump function, just like Entresto. So the left ventricular ejection fraction in patients that have the typical heritage of heart failure in the Western world, which is ischemic cardiomyopathy, meaning the traditional atherosclerosis, multiple heart attacks, and the resulting in the failing heart that we now call ischemic cardiomyopathy. Nicorandil has significant benefits there. And that has a lot to do with its dual mechanism of action, because as you probably know from your work on Entresto, vasodilators have no outcomes benefits in heart failure. But Nicorandil is shown in a number of very promising studies that the left ventricular pump function does improve. So there's this dual mechanism of action that's probably also, 1 + 1 equaling a little bit more than 2 that led to the outcomes benefit in patients with chronic stable angina. There's another area that's particularly interesting for us, which is microvascular disease. The chronic stable angina patients don't just, a lot of them don't just have coronary artery disease of the large epicardial coronary arteries, but also of the much smaller branches. That is, by the way, the reason why stenting ultimately doesn't really work. About 65% of patients that have classic coronary artery disease also have microvascular disease. And based on the European experience, Nicorandil is one of the go-to drugs when patients have this mix of big vessels and very small vessels in the coronary artery tree being affected and causing angina symptoms. And that can be in the mix of classic coronary disease and aspects of microvascular disease, or what we now call INOCA, ischemia in non-obstructive coronary disease, when the patient really doesn't have macrovascular coronary disease, but they still have angina, which is called microvascular angina now. So that is another indication that we are very seriously looking at, and where there is an enormous unmet need, because there's, like what you probably remember from your work on Entresto, where left ventricular heart failure with preserved ejection fraction basically until recently didn't have any drug that had that indication. Yes. And then there are other areas where Nicorandil has shown benefits. It shows benefits with the preservation of kidney function in patients that develop nephropathy as a result of the contrast agents being used. Nicorandil can also improve and prevent cardiotoxicity with certain chemotherapeutic agents. So there's a number of different areas that are all basically connected to the heart, but not just standing on that, where there's possibilities of further development. It depends a little bit on where we're going to go for our 505b1, B2 indication, chronic stable angina. We have to kind of stay within that boundary, and that will be our lead indication. And hopefully, with the medication doing well in this very highly unmet need area, we might have an opportunity to develop the drug further for life cycle management indications that are also very interesting and are also very important.
Thank you so much. That's exactly what I wanted to, ask you, because again, back of the mind, I have done these analysis and studies, so I remembered a lot of indications which are kind of overlapping, and then so yeah, thanks a lot for your time. I think I've taken a lot of time beyond what we stipulated. So yeah, it was a very interesting conversation. I have multiple more questions, but I think you guys have your other commitments as well. So I would like to take a temporary pause here and maybe promise for another discussion of this kind of an insightful discussion with both of you, maybe sometime in coming future. And I'm really hoping the best for AUX 001. All the best for the American Heart Association presentation. And I would love to talk to you both again very, very soon, and know more about AUX 001 and the other molecules, 002 and 003 as well. So thanks a lot. It was lovely talking to you both. Lovely talking both of you, and thanks once again for your time.
Same here. It has been a real pleasure working with you, and we'll look forward to talking with you in the future.
Yes,
you,
Himanshu, thank you so much for your insightful questions, and we'll be happy to talk anytime.
Thank you, Jed.